This story is titled, Stepsister Moved Into My Home, Got Pregnant, and Said She'll Be Taking Over My Room for Nursery. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be posting something like this, but here I am, venting on Reddit because I have no idea what to do anymore. I, 21 male, live in a house I inherited from my grandmother about 2 years ago. It's not some giant mansion, but it's a decent-sized 2-story house, and I'm proud of it. It was left to me specifically in her will because I took care of her toward the end, and she wanted me to have a stable place to live. To help with expenses, I rent out rooms to 3 friends of mine: Jack, 19M, Kim, 18F, and NE, 18F. I've known Jack and Kim since high school, and NE is someone Kim introduced me to who needed a room. They're good people, and living with them has been easy. We've had no drama, just a simple roommate dynamic. We all respect the house, split the chores, and hold little monthly meetings to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then there's Susan, 22F. Susan is my stepsister. Now let me preface this by saying, Susan and I have never been particularly close. My dad remarried when I was 14, and Susan was already 15 at the time. She's my stepmom's daughter from a previous relationship. She's always been a little entitled, but for the most part, we tolerated each other while we lived under the same roof. Then our parents moved overseas for my dad's job, and I thought I'd finally get some peace. I was wrong. 3 years ago, while my grandmother was still alive, Susan asked if she could move in for just a year to finish up her schooling. At the time, my grandmother was still healthy, and she liked the idea of having more family around. So she agreed. Susan moved in, and at first everything was fine. But then she dropped out of school. She claimed it was too stressful, but from what I saw, it was more about the fact that she met her now boyfriend Mike, 28M. Mike's one of those guys who thinks he knows everything about everything. He's loud, opinionated, and not exactly the most responsible person. I've overheard him say things like, "Why does a woman need to go to college? That's a waste of money." And let me tell you, Susan eats that crap up. My grandma didn't like Mike at all, and she made it clear Susan's arrangement was only temporary. But my grandma passed away not long after, and Susan stayed. At first, I let her because I didn't want to deal with drama. I was grieving, and it felt like too much to handle. Susan told me she'd pay rent and help out, so I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. It wasn't at first. Fast forward to 5 months ago. Susan sat us all down and announced that she's pregnant. I didn't know how to feel about it. I mean, it's her life, and I'm not going to judge her choices. But what I didn't realize at the time is that this baby was going to become my problem. At first, she told us she was planning to move in with Mike soon. She said they were looking at apartments together, and she wouldn't be here long term. Honestly, I thought that sounded great for her. She'd have her own place to raise the baby, and Mike could finally step up and be the responsible boyfriend she swears he is. But weeks turned into months, and there was no movement. Mike still has his dingy apartment, but apparently it's too small for a baby, and they can't afford anything bigger. Meanwhile, Susan started acting like my house was suddenly her house. At first, the changes were small. She started bringing home baby stuff, like a stroller, a crib, and piles of baby clothes, and just stacking it in her room. That's her space, so I didn't care. But then she started talking about baby-proofing the house, which made me nervous. I'll admit I didn't shut her down right away. I thought, okay, making the house safer isn't a big deal. We'd all talk about it at one of our monthly meetings and figure out a fair plan. But Susan wasn't waiting for that. She started redecorating. Out of nowhere, I came home one day to find these tacky floral curtains hanging in the living room and a couple of cheap turtle statues on the hallway shelf. I was annoyed, but calm. I took them down and quietly put everything back in Susan's room. I told her that while I appreciated her trying to make the house homey, the common areas weren't her space to change. Well, she lost it. She started yelling about how I was being controlling and unsupportive. She said the house felt stuffy and like an old lady's home. Yeah, it was my grandmother's house. I reminded her that she could decorate her own room however she wanted, but I wanted the shared spaces to stay as they were. And here's the kicker. She then asked if she could paint her room orange. I told her no. First of all, the house is mine, and I don't want the walls ruined. Second, I'm renting to other people, and I can't just let everyone paint their rooms however they want. Susan exploded. She blamed her outburst on hormones and stormed off, but things got icy after that. Over the next few weeks, Susan kept making little comments under her breath. She complained to Mike, who of course backed her up, and suddenly I became the bad guy for not letting her prepare for the baby properly. Mike even had the nerve to tell me I was being selfish because Susan's going to be a mother. I ignored it. I thought, okay, she's hormonal, stressed, and she'll calm down. But oh boy, I was so wrong. All right, here's where things started to spiral. After the whole redecorating drama, Susan and I weren't exactly on speaking terms. She was giving me the cold shoulder most of the time, but when she did talk, it was either complaining or passive-aggressive comments about how I don't care about family. I just ignored her and kept doing my thing, hoping she'd chill out eventually. One afternoon, Susan knocked on my door. Rare, because she usually just barged in when she wanted to talk. She asked if we could sit down and have a real conversation. I was skeptical, but I agreed. I thought maybe she was finally ready to talk like an adult. We sat at the kitchen table, and at first, Susan was calm. She started by saying she's really stressed about the baby coming and how she doesn't feel prepared. She mentioned how hard it's been to find an apartment with Mike and how the rent in our area is ridiculous. Honestly, I felt for her. I get that having a kid when you're unprepared is a nightmare. Then she hit me with, I've been thinking, and I have a solution that works for everyone. I should have known where this was going. Susan leaned forward like she was sharing a big secret and said, I want to move into your room. For context, my room is the master bedroom, and it's the biggest in the house. It has an attached office space that I use for my small online business. Basically, my livelihood. Susan explained that the office would be perfect as a nursery, and she and the baby really need the extra space. I stared at her for a second because I genuinely thought she was joking. She wasn't. I told her straight up, no. Susan blinked at me like I had just spoken a foreign language. What do you mean, no? You don't even need all that space. You're just one person. I told her I do need the space. I use the office to work, and I wasn't about to give up my room just because she decided to have a baby. It's not like I forced her into this situation. She looked at me like I was being unreasonable and said, but it makes sense. It's better for everyone. I asked her how exactly it was better for me, and she said, because you'll be helping your sister when she needs you most. At this point, I was done playing nice. I reminded her that she's renting one room. That's it. She doesn't get to dictate who lives where in my house. Her response? But Jack and Kim are younger than me, and they don't need their rooms. When one of them moves out, the baby can take their room. Why are you being so selfish? I had to take a second to process what I was hearing. Not only was she trying to take my room, but now she was making plans for other people's rooms too. The entitlement was off the charts. I told her Jack and Kim weren't going anywhere, and even if they did, she still wouldn't be getting their rooms because that's not how any of this works. Susan started crying at this point. Big, dramatic tears. I can't believe you're doing this to me. You know I don't have anywhere else to go. I reminded her that she and Mike were already looking for an apartment, and if Mike cared so much about her and the baby, he should be the one making sacrifices, not me. That's when she lost it. She started yelling, saying I was heartless and selfish for not helping my family in a time of need. She accused me of prioritizing strangers, Jack and Kim, over my own stepsister. I stayed calm and told her that I wasn't going to let her guilt me into doing something I didn't want to do. I told her this house was my home, and that if she didn't like the arrangement, she could find somewhere else to live. That's when she dropped her trump card, our parents. She got up, wiped her face, and said, fine, I'll talk to Dad and Mom. I'm sure they'll agree that you're being completely unreasonable. I didn't respond. I just let her storm off and slam the door to her room. A few hours later, my phone started blowing up. My dad was calling, my stepmom was texting, and both of them were clearly on Susan's side. I finally picked up when my dad called for the third time. Your sister called us in tears, he started. Why are you being so cruel to her? I tried to explain the situation calmly. I told him that Susan wanted to take my room, that she was acting like the house belonged to her, and that Mike moving in wasn't an option because of how disrespectful he's been in the past. But my dad wasn't having it. She's pregnant, son. She's vulnerable right now. Can't you just help her out? You don't need all that space, it's not a big deal. At this point, I was getting frustrated. I reminded him that this is my house, and Susan has no right to make demands. I also told him that letting Mike move in would only create more problems. My dad just sighed and said, family comes first, always. You're her brother. You need to do the right thing. That phrase, the right thing, pissed me off. I asked him, why is it always my responsibility to clean up Susan's mess? She chose to get pregnant. She's choosing to stay here instead of figuring out a real solution. Why is that my problem? My dad got quiet for a second and then said, I'm disappointed in you. That stung. I'm not going to lie. But I stood my ground. I told him Susan wasn't getting my room, and if she and Mike didn't like the living situation, they could figure something else out. I hung up before he could respond. After that call, I felt drained. My parents were completely on Susan's side, and I knew she'd be using that as ammo. She didn't say a word to me for the rest of the night, but I could hear her talking to Mike on the phone, probably trashing me. The next morning, I found a note taped to my door. It said, "I hope you're happy. Mom and Dad agree that you're a selfish jerk. I'll be talking to a lawyer about my rights to live here." A lawyer? Seriously? I knew Susan was dramatic, but this was a new level. At that point, I decided I needed to get ahead of this. If Susan wanted to play hardball, I was going to be ready. After Susan's dramatic threat about talking to a lawyer, I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for her to pull something. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not dumb either. This is my house legally, and she has no claim to it. Still, I wanted to cover all my bases before things got worse, because I knew Susan wasn't going to let this go quietly. I called my uncle, who's pretty level-headed about these kinds of things. He knows the family dynamic, and has always been one of the few people who doesn't blindly take Susan's side just because she cries about something. Luckily for me, my uncle has a close friend who works in property law, so we set up a meeting for the next day. I also brought Jack and Kim with me for moral support, because they've been living through this chaos too. NE couldn't come since she had work, but she was updated and just as fed up as the rest of us. The lawyer was an older guy who looked like he'd seen it all. After I explained the situation, how Susan's living here month to month, her wanting my master bedroom, her threats, and everything else, he kind of just sat back and said, "You've got nothing to worry about." He laid it all out clearly for me. Susan has no legal claim to the house. It's mine. She's living here month to month, which means I can give her proper notice to move out at any time. She doesn't have a written lease, and verbal agreements can only go so far in court. The lawyer also said that while I couldn't evict her on the grounds of being pregnant, which I would never do anyway because I'm not a monster, I could evict her for breaking house rules. And boy, did she break them. Here's where things got interesting. Jack and Kim finally opened up about things Susan had been doing behind my back. They didn't want to stir the pot before, but now that the situation had escalated, they felt like I needed to know. First off, Susan had apparently been making snide, homophobic comments to Jack. Jack's openly gay, and Susan knows this, but I guess she thought it was okay to mutter things like, "This is a phase," or "Real men don't act like that," whenever they cross paths. Jack said he didn't want to make a big deal about it, but it clearly bothered him. Then Kim told me about how Susan had been barging into her room without knocking. Susan kept borrowing things without asking. Makeup, clothes, even food. The final straw for Kim was when Susan ruined a load of her laundry. Kim's pretty sure Susan did it out of pettiness, because the clothes weren't just mixed up. They were completely trashed. Hearing this made me even angrier than I already was. Susan was treating everyone in the house like we were just inconveniences she could walk all over. This wasn't just my problem anymore. It was affecting my roommates, and I wasn't about to let it continue. After the lawyer reassured me that I had every legal right to give Susan notice, I asked what steps I needed to take. He said the key was to document everything. So when I got home that night, I sent Susan a formal notice by email and text. "Hi Susan, this is your official notice that I will not be renewing your month-to-month agreement. You have 30 days to make arrangements to leave the property. If you'd like to discuss this further, I'm available to talk tomorrow." I wasn't trying to be rude or antagonistic. I just wanted it to be clear and professional. Next, I called a locksmith. I had already been planning to change the locks for unrelated reasons. There's some old baggage with an ex who still had a key, so I figured it was a good time to just lock everything down and make the house more secure. The locksmith came that same evening and replaced all the locks on the front door and bedroom doors. I also had a lock added to the living room door and garage, because I wasn't about to let Susan or Mike snoop around where they didn't belong. The kitchen, bathroom, and Susan's room were left accessible to her, because that's all her agreement entitles her to. Just to cover myself, I texted Susan one more time. Period. "Hi, the locks have been changed for security reasons. Your key is available for pickup. Let me know when you'll come by and I'll make sure you get it." No response. That night, Susan didn't come home. I knew she was with Mike. Honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want to deal with her storming into the house and throwing another tantrum. What I did get, though, was another call from my dad. "Why are you locking your sister out of her home? Do you realize how cruel you're being?" I calmly explained to him that Susan wasn't locked out. Her key was ready for her to pick up, and I had texted her multiple times about it. My dad didn't seem to care about that part. "She's pregnant, for God's sake. How can you be so heartless to your family?" At this point, I was done arguing. I told him, Susan has 30 days to find somewhere else to go. I've been more than reasonable. She's broken house rules, disrespected me and my roommates, and made living here miserable. I'm not going to let her take over my house just because she thinks she can guilt me into it. My dad started going on about how family comes first and how disappointed he was in me, but I just ended the call. There was nothing left to say. It's been a day since all this went down, and Susan still hasn't shown up to get her key. I've texted her a couple more times to let her know it's available, but she's ignoring me. My guess is that she's staying at Mike's and probably trying to figure out her next move. I'm not looking forward to the moment she comes back, because I know there's going to be a scene. Susan's not the type to go quietly, and I'm sure she's already spinning some story to my parents about how I'm the villain. But here's the thing. I'm done feeling guilty about this. She's my stepsister, not my responsibility. She made her choices, and I'm not about to let her steamroll me, my roommates, and my life because of those choices. I'm prepared for whatever happens next. If she wants to drag this out, I've got the lawyer's advice to back me up. If she wants to keep our parents on her side, so be it. I know I'm doing the right thing for myself and my home. It took 3 days. 3 blissful, Susan-free days where the house was peaceful, and nobody had to tiptoe around her tantrums or deal with her passive-aggressive remarks. I knew it wouldn't last forever, though. Susan's not the type to let things go, and I could feel the impending storm hanging over the house like a dark cloud. On the evening of the 3rd day, I was in the living room with Jack and Kim watching TV when we heard Susan's car pull into the driveway. The 3 of us exchanged looks because we all knew exactly what was coming. The front door rattled, and then there was a loud, frustrated pounding. "Are you serious? You changed the locks? Let me in!" Susan's voice was loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. I grabbed her new key, walked to the door, and opened it to find Susan standing there with Mike behind her, looking smug as always. Susan looked furious. Her face was flushed, her eyes were red, and she was holding her stomach dramatically, like she was trying to emphasize her pregnancy. "Here's your key," I said as calmly as I could, holding it out to her. She snatched it out of my hand and shoved past me into the house. Mike tried to follow, but I stepped in front of him. "Where do you think you're going?" I asked. "Into the house," he said, his tone casual, like he owned the place. "You're not welcome here," I said firmly. "This is still my house." And Susan whipped around from the hallway. "You. Oh my God, you're being ridiculous. He's here to help me carry my stuff upstairs. You're going to make a pregnant woman do it herself?" Jack and Kim were watching from the living room, and I could feel their silent support. I wasn't about to let Mike get his foot in the door, because knowing him, he'd just stay for a few nights and never leave. "I'll help you carry your things," I told her, ignoring Mike completely. Susan groaned dramatically. "You're being impossible. This is our house too, you know." "Our house?" I repeated, trying not to lose my cool. "It's my house. You rent a room here. You don't get to bring your boyfriend in whenever you want, and you don't get to call the shots." Susan turned back to Mike and waved him off. "Fine. Just wait in the car. I'll deal with this." Mike muttered something under his breath, probably an insult, but he left. Susan stomped up the stairs to her room, and I followed, ready to carry her stuff so we could avoid another argument. Once we got into her room, it became obvious what she'd been doing the past few days. The place was crammed with baby supplies, bags of diapers, a crib still in its box, baby clothes, blankets, bottles. Half of it wasn't even unpacked. I couldn't help myself. "You bought all this stuff, but you still haven't found somewhere to live?" Susan ignored me and dropped into her chair. "Mike and I are still looking. It's not easy finding a place that's affordable and big enough for the baby." I took a deep breath because I knew where this was going. "Susan, you have 30 days. I gave you notice. You're going to have to figure this out." She stared at me, her expression going cold. "Do you know how much of a jerk you're being? You have plenty of room here. I'm family. I'm pregnant. And instead of helping me, you're kicking me out onto the street." "You're not being kicked out," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You've had months to figure this out. And instead of doing that, you've been arguing with me about paint colors and decorations. I'm not responsible for fixing this for you." Susan stood up, and I swear I thought she was going to throw something. "You don't even need this house. You're just one person. Grandma wouldn't want you to throw me out like this." At that, I lost it a little. "Don't bring Grandma into this. You know she didn't want Mike here. She didn't let you redecorate when she was alive. So don't act like I'm being unreasonable. You've taken advantage of every ounce of kindness I've shown you, and I'm done." Susan started crying, full-on sobbing as she sat back down. I can't believe you're treating me like this. I'm pregnant. What kind of brother does this to his sister? The crying wasn't working this time. I was done feeling guilty. You have 30 days, I repeated. If you need help moving your stuff out, I'll help you. But you're not staying here. And Mike is never moving in. Susan didn't respond, but she spent the rest of the evening slamming doors and stomping around the house. Mike came back later to pick her up, and they left without another word. I could tell she was plotting something because Susan's the type who doesn't go down without a fight. Later that night, my dad called. Susan told me what happened, he said, his tone accusatory right off the bat. Of course, she'd called him. I wasn't even surprised. She told you the part where she's been breaking house rules, treating Jack and Kim like crap, and demanding my room? Or did she leave that out? My dad sighed. She's stressed, son. She's pregnant, and you need to be more understanding. You're throwing her out when she has nowhere else to go. I gave her 30 days notice, I said, as calmly as I could. She's had plenty of time to figure this out. She's not my responsibility. She's an adult, and so is Mike. They can sort this out together. She's your family, he shot back. You're supposed to help your family. I've been helping her for years, I said. This house is mine, and I'm not letting her take advantage of me anymore. We went back and forth for a while, but it was clear my dad wasn't listening to me. He ended the call by saying he was disappointed and that I was acting selfish. I hung up and sat in silence for a while, trying to process everything. After Susan's dramatic text about talking to a lawyer, I knew she wasn't bluffing about trying to make my life miserable. She's always been the type to escalate situations when she doesn't get her way. And with Mike involved, I knew things were going to get messy. 2 days passed after the last meltdown, and the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Jack, Kim, and NE were all on edge, but we were trying to live our lives as normally as possible. Susan hadn't come back yet, which was fine by all of us. I figured she was still staying at Mike's and stewing about what to do next. I was wrong. On the third morning, I woke up to Jack banging on my door at 7 a.m. Mike's here, he said, looking angry and still half asleep. He's in the driveway, and he's unloading stuff. I think he's trying to move in. At first, I thought Jack was joking because I couldn't imagine even Mike being that bold. But when I looked out the window, sure enough, there he was, dragging a mattress out of the back of his beat-up truck like he was about to set up camp. I was so stunned I almost laughed. Almost. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my phone, and stormed outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded as I walked up to Mike. He looked at me like I was the one who was out of line. "Susan told me I could move my stuff in. You didn't seriously think you could keep me out, did you?" I was so angry I felt like I could explode. First off, Susan doesn't own this house. I do. Second, you're not moving in, period. Take your stuff and leave, or I'm calling the cops. Mike smirked and leaned on the mattress like he had all the time in the world. You're going to call the cops on the father of your sister's baby? Nice. Real classy. I pulled out my phone right in front of him and dialed the non-emergency police number. Watch me. Mike's smirk disappeared. Okay, chill out. He threw his hands up in mock surrender. No need to get dramatic. I'll leave, for now. I watched as he loaded the mattress back into the truck, all while muttering insults under his breath. Once he was done, he slammed the door to his truck, pointed a finger at me and said, "This isn't over, man. You're screwing over your own family, and it's going to come back to bite you." I ignored him. I wasn't about to argue with someone who thought threatening me was a good idea. I stayed outside until he finally drove off. Jack, who'd been standing near the porch the whole time, let out a low whistle. "I didn't think he'd actually try to pull that," Jack said. "What was he even thinking?" "Honestly, I don't think he was thinking," I replied. "He probably figured he could just bully his way in, like always." About an hour later, Susan texted me. "What the hell is wrong with you? You called the police on Mike? He was just trying to help me move in." I didn't even bother to respond. Mike wasn't moving in. End of story. But Susan wasn't done. A couple of hours later, I heard her car pull up. I braced myself as she walked through the door, slamming it behind her. She was holding some papers in her hand and looked like she was ready for a fight. "What's this?" she demanded, shoving the papers at me. I looked them over and I swear I almost laughed. They were random internet printouts about tenant rights and eviction laws. I handed them back to her. "Susan, this doesn't apply to you. I already talked to a lawyer. You're month to month. I gave you proper notice. You don't have a leg to stand on." Her face turned red. "Mike says I do have rights, and you can't just throw a pregnant woman out. I'm family, and this is our home." I had to take a deep breath to keep from yelling. "Susan, I'm done explaining this to you. You've broken house rules, disrespected me and my roommates, And now Mike's trying to move in behind my back. You have 30 days. That's it. She stared at me for a moment, her hands shaking as she crumpled the papers. You're going to regret this. Dad's already on my side, and when he finds out how cruel you're being, he's going to make you let me stay. I laughed bitterly. Dad doesn't have any say in this house. It's mine, Susan. You can cry to him all you want, but it's not going to change anything. She looked like she was about to cry again, but instead, she stormed up to her room and slammed the door so hard I thought it would come off the hinges. The next 2 days were tense. Susan was sulking in her room most of the time, but she made sure to slam the doors or stomp around the house whenever she came out. She didn't speak to anyone, but the energy was awful, like we were all walking on eggshells. Jack and Kim stayed out of her way, but N.E. had had enough. On the second day, Susan left dirty dishes piled in the sink and didn't clean up after herself. N.E. confronted her in the kitchen. You're not the only one who lives here, Susan. Clean up your mess. Susan snapped back, maybe you shouldn't even be here. This house is for family, not freeloaders. N.E. came straight to me and told me what Susan said. I couldn't believe it. Susan was now openly attacking my roommates, the same people who've done nothing but be patient with her nonsense. That night, I called a house meeting without Susan. I sat down with Jack, Kim, and N.E., and we all agreed we couldn't let Susan keep making the house miserable. I promised them I'd handle it. The next morning, I sent Susan a final message. This is your second reminder that you have 30 days to vacate the property. I've been more than fair, but your behavior toward me and the other tenants has gone too far. If you continue to violate house rules or harass anyone, I'll involve my lawyer again. She didn't respond. But I know her. She's planning her next move. The tension in the house had become unbearable. Susan was still sulking in her room, stomping around like a petulant child whenever she emerged to use the kitchen or bathroom. My other roommates, Jack, Kim, and N.E., had been tiptoeing around to avoid her wrath. Nobody wanted to set her off because we all knew what she was capable of. I was counting down the days until her 30-day notice ran out. In my mind, I kept reassuring myself that if we just rode out the clock, this nightmare would end. But Susan had other plans. It all came to a head on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garage organizing some stuff for my small business when I heard shouting from inside the house. Jack ran out to get me. Dude, Susan's going nuts, he said, out of breath. She's throwing stuff around the living room and screaming at N.E. I dropped everything and ran inside. Sure enough, when I walked into the living room, Susan was in full meltdown mode. N.E. was standing near the wall with her arms crossed, looking both angry and stunned, while Susan was pacing around the room with tears streaming down her face. You people are so ungrateful, Susan screamed, her voice cracking. I'm pregnant. I'm carrying a child, and you're all treating me like garbage. Susan, what the hell is going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned on me, pointing a shaking finger in my face. This is all your fault. I told you I needed help, and you're just kicking me out like I'm nothing. You don't care about family. You don't care about me or my baby. Before I could respond, she picked up one of the throw pillows from the couch and hurled it across the room like it was a weapon. It hit the coffee table and knocked over N.E.'s water bottle, which spilled everywhere. N.E. finally snapped. You're insane, Susan. I've been patient, but this is it. You're treating us like garbage when we've done nothing to you. You're making this whole house miserable. Miserable, Susan shrieked, clutching her stomach like she was playing the ultimate victim. I'm the one who's been treated like dirt since I moved in. All I wanted was a little support, and you've all been against me since day one. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool as I approached her. Susan, this has to stop. You can't throw tantrums and destroy things in a house that isn't yours. I've been more than fair. You're making this harder than it has to be. Susan's eyes narrowed at me, and for a moment, I swear I saw something shift. It wasn't tears anymore. It was anger. You think you're so righteous, she said, her voice suddenly quiet and dangerous. You don't deserve this house. Grandma would have wanted me here. She would have wanted me to have a safe place for my baby. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Are you serious? Grandma didn't even let Mike in the house when she was alive. You're trying to rewrite history because it suits you. This is my house, Susan, not yours, not Mike's, and certainly not Grandma's anymore. You need to accept that. She stood there frozen for a moment, looking at me like I'd just slapped her. Then she did something I didn't expect. She stormed upstairs and slammed her bedroom door so hard that a picture fell off the wall. For the next hour, the house was silent. Jack and Kim helped N.E. clean up the water Susan had spilled, and we all sat in the kitchen, just waiting. None of us knew what her next move was going to be, but we were all on edge. Then, Susan came back downstairs. This time, she was dragging a suitcase behind her. Mike was outside in his truck, honking the horn like a jerk. Susan didn't say a word to any of us as she walked past. Her face was blotchy from crying, but she looked furious, like she'd swallowed her pride but was still simmering underneath. When she reached the front door, she stopped and turned around to face me. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice cold. "You've ruined everything. I'll make sure Dad and Mom know exactly how awful you are. You're going to regret this someday." "I'm sure I won't," I replied calmly. She glared at me for a moment, then stormed outside. Mike loaded her suitcase into the truck, and they drove off, tires squealing down the street. The house felt eerily quiet once she was gone, like we'd all just survived a hurricane. I stood in the living room for a minute, trying to process everything. Jack came up beside me and clapped me on the shoulder. "Well, that was dramatic," he said. "Understatement of the year," Annie muttered as she joined us. "I'm just glad she's finally gone. I can't believe she threw a full tantrum like that." "I knew she'd go out with a bang," Kim added, shaking her head. "But at least it's over." And it was. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Over the next few days, Susan continued to blow up my phone with angry texts and voicemails. I ignored them all. My dad called me twice to yell about how I'd abandoned my sister and acted like a monster, but I wasn't backing down. I calmly told him that Susan had made her own bed, and it wasn't my responsibility to fix her problems. Eventually, the calls and messages stopped. I guess Susan realized she wasn't getting anywhere with me. With Susan gone, the atmosphere in the house completely changed. Jack, Kim, N.E., and I finally felt like we could relax again. We cleaned up her room, which was left a mess, and I changed the locks one last time just to be safe. Looking back, I don't regret anything. I stood up for myself, my friends, and my home. Susan tried to manipulate, bully, and guilt-trip me into giving up everything I'd worked for, but I didn't let her. It sucks that my dad and stepmom are still on her side, but at this point, I've accepted it. Some people will always choose to see what they want to see. Final note, I know Susan's out there somewhere, probably telling everyone I'm the villain in her story, but I don't care. I'm finally free of her chaos, and the house feels like home again. If you take anything away from this, let it be this. Don't let entitled people walk all over you just because they're family. Set boundaries. Stand your ground. It's worth it.